Will their parents let the kids take an airplane ride? Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. Today we're going to rejoin Hannah and Bobby after they returned home from the field trip to the airport. Each of the two children arrived home with a flyer or a brochure that described the Young Eagles program through the EAA. When they gave the flyer to their parents, they were worried that maybe the parents would say no. The parents did not expect to receive this flyer. They did not expect that the children's trip to the airport would result in them being invited to fly on a small airplane. In each household, the flyer was received with some caution. Both Hannah's parents and Bobby's parents said, "We'll talk about this." Well, talk about it they did. Bobby's mom and dad spoke privately about this matter. Bobby's mom was concerned about safety. She didn't want a tragedy. She expressed an instinct of hers to protect Bobby from unnecessary risk. Bobby's dad focused more on the adventure and the experience, and so he was in favor of letting Bobby take this airplane ride. Bobby's mother, Kathy, decided to get more information from the internet about the Young Eagles program, the EAA, and their safety record. And then they would discuss it again later. No decision was made. At Hannah's house, the discussion was the reverse. Hannah's dad felt very protective of his little girl, and he was not in favor of her going on this airplane ride. Hannah's mom was more in favor of Hannah having lots of interesting experiences so that she would develop into a very good, strong woman. Hannah's parents discussed this and decided to discuss the matter further with Bobby's parents. Joanna called Kathy and they talked about the concerns, and Kathy reported what she had found in her research online, that the safety record was quite good and that the pilots giving these airplane rides were licensed by the FAA. Their airplanes have to be airworthy, and the pilots are vetted by the EAA as being qualified to give these rides. Further discussions in both households ensued, and the decision was made separately that each child would be allowed to go. Joanna and Kathy, the moms, talked about this, and it was decided that Kathy would call the pilot, Mr. Gonzalez, and make the arrangements for the Young Eagles flight. Kathy called Mr. Gonzalez, who was happy to take the children on a Young Eagles flight. He offered to take them on Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning. This was confirmed in both households, and the children were told that their flight would be on Saturday morning. They were thrilled. They chattered about how exciting this was and what a wonderful experience it would be, although they didn't really know what it was going to be like, really. On Saturday, both families went to the airport by car. There on the ramp, where the children had looked at airplanes on their field trip, was Mr. Gonzalez, as planned. He greeted all 4 parents and both children. He went through the pre-flight procedure showing all 4 parents how focused he was on safety. The question was, which child would ride in the front seat on the first half of the flight and which child would be in the back seat? Mr. Gonzalez pulled a quarter out of his pocket and flipped it up in the air, catching it and putting it on the top of his other hand. He looked at Hannah and said, "Your call, heads or tails?" Hannah said, "Tails." He looked and showed it to them, and it was tails. So she got to ride up front in the front seat on the way out. The plan for this flight was to fly to another small airport and land so that the children could switch seats. Mr. Gonzalez had a booster seat for the passenger side of the airplane, but not one for the back seat. He asked the parents to go back on the other side of the fence while they do this flight, and they did. He put Bobby in the back seat of the plane and then Hannah in the front seat on the booster seat. Both children had seat belts and shoulder harnesses. Soon the engine was started and he was talking on the radio. Both children were given a headset with a microphone so that they could talk to Mr. Gonzalez on the intercom. The headset also made it much more quiet because small airplanes are very loud. Mr. Gonzalez asked the children to not talk if he was talking on the radio, and he pointed to a button on the yoke and said, "When I push this button, that turns on the radio, and then I'll be talking on the radio. So you should not talk and interrupt me if I'm talking." Okay? The children nodded. He spoke on the radio and taxied the airplane out to the runway. He did some final checks, and then he asked the children on the intercom, were they ready? Both kids nodded. Both kids said yes through their microphone. He pulled the airplane out onto the runway, pushed the throttle all the way in and held it. The airplane started moving and it accelerated rapidly, and soon he pulled back gently on the yoke and the airplane rose into the air. It climbed. It was a little bumpy, but not bad. He talked on the radio, and they flew away from this airport. He did some gentle maneuvers, banking the airplane to the right and to the left so that both kids could see the ground. They could see cars and houses, and they could see what was going on the ground below them. He pointed out some things in the town, and then he flew to another airport. This airport did not have a control tower. It was just a runway and a couple of buildings, and it was very quiet. He talked on the radio, but he wasn't talking to anyone in particular. He was just announcing what he was going to do. And he came in with the airplane and the 2 kids and landed at this airport. He taxied off the runway, turned the engine off, and got the kids out of the airplane. He asked them if they liked their experience so far. Both kids were very happy with their flight so far. They looked around the airport, And it was an interesting place to go because this was an airport where they did glider flights. And there were several gliders lined up next to the runway. So they went over and examined these gliders. The children thought it was very odd because these airplanes didn't have any propellers. How could they fly? They're gliders. Mr. Gonzalez explained that that airplane over there was the tow plane and that they would hook the gliders up with a rope and the tow plane would pull the glider up into the sky and then the glider pilot would release and bring the airplane back and land it. The kids didn't know what to think about that. That was a very odd thing for them to hear about, that someone would fly an airplane with no engine, just a glider. He answered their questions, and then it was time to go back to tell their parents what they had seen. He helped Hannah into the back seat and Bobby into the front seat with the booster seat. The seat belts and harnesses were applied, and soon they were at the end of the runway getting ready to take off. Again, Mr. Gonzalez spoke into the radio, but he wasn't talking to anyone in particular. He was just making an announcement that they were going to take off from this airport. Soon they were airborne. They were flying back to the original airport to greet their parents. Everything was going great. It became time for Mr. Gonzalez to talk to the control tower at the airport, so he set the frequency on the radio and pushed the button on the yoke, spoke into his microphone, and waited for a response. No response. It's unusual. So he checked the frequency on the radio. It was correct. He repeated the transmission. No answer. He switched radios because this airplane has 2 radios that he can speak on. So he switched to the other radio and he did the same thing. No answer. He started thinking about what's the correct procedure because he can't just go land at that airport without permission. So he went through it in his mind. Should he switch the radar transponder to the code that signifies no radio? 7600 on the transponder. He could do that, but that's kind of an emergency procedure. Would there be another way? In the meantime, he's flying the airplane and he's not particularly close to the airport. He thought, maybe I should go back to the glider airport and call them on my cell phone. Maybe I should do that. He said, I wish I had my handheld radio. My small handheld radio would be great, but I didn't bring it today. He was preparing in his mind to turn the airplane back to the small airport with the gliders when he heard a voice on the radio. Aircraft calling the tower. Is there an aircraft calling the tower and I've not answered you? If so, 3 clicks. Click, click, click. The voice from the tower said, okay, I can hear your microphone click. So we have 2-way communication. This is not an emergency. do you want to land at our airport? Click, click. The voice on the radio said, okay, you want to come in and land. Do you have current weather? Click, click. Because Mr. Gonzalez had listened to the weather transmission, so he knew what the weather numbers were. He understood that. And he had signaled with 2 clicks on the microphone. The tower said, okay, you want to land at this airport and you have current weather, so join the downwind for runway 3. Click, click. When he got to the downwind, when he got near the airport, the tower called him and said, aircraft on the downwind, you are cleared to land. Click, click. Mr. Gonzalez then landed the airplane as he had done hundreds of times, uneventfully. When he got the airplane stopped, he pulled off the runway, and the tower told him, monitor ground, you're cleared to taxi to the ramp. Click, click. He taxied the airplane back to the ramp, shut the engine off, and opened the door. He motioned to the parents to come out to the airplane, and he helped both children out of their seats. Each child was greeted by his or her parents, and Mr. Gonzalez excused himself, stepping aside to make a phone call. He called the control tower and thanked them for helping him with that problem. They were very gracious. He assured them that the airplane would be repaired and that this problem would not happen again. Mr. Gonzalez rejoined the parents and explained that there was a small problem with the radio, but because of really good air traffic control and really good safety procedures, it was not really a problem. There was no real danger. At this point, the Young Eagle certificates were prepared and handed to the children. He asked the children if they had any questions, and they said no. Both children were all smiles. All 4 parents were happy and relieved that the children had had this wonderful experience and that nothing bad had happened. That's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We invite your comments below. Did you take a flight in a small airplane when you were a child? Did you want to fly in an airplane when you were a little kid? I invite you to join us on future videos. See you soon.